In this lesson, we're going to talk about solving one variable equations. Now, one variable equations mean you just have one letter or one unknown in there. For instance, that has two variables or two unknowns, and you will get to that eventually in algebra, not today. Today we're going to be looking at things like, this. How many variables do you see? Just one, and that's what we're going to be solving. So let's look at some very small ones. If we know that 2 times something equals 8, what does that something have to be? And if you said 4, you're absolutely right. The only thing that you can double and get 8 would be 4. Well, in algebra, we take that question mark or that something and we represent it with a variable. Sometimes it's x, sometimes it might be y, sometimes it might be a. That is an arbitrary assignment. And if you were talking about apples, you might use a. If you might talk about buses, if we have 2 times the number of buses equals 8, they might use b. The variable really doesn't matter. What matters is that you understand how to get it by itself. So in our first example, we said the question mark must equal 4. And so we might write something like that. So in solving one variable equations, we take something that looks like that and we turn it into something that looks like that. So what we need to do is isolate that variable or that question mark so that we know exactly what that question mark equals. We don't want to know what 2 times the question mark equals. We want to know what the question mark equals. So in algebraic equations with one variable, we do what we call inverse operations. So if I have 2x, and that really means 2 times x, there is an understood multiplication happening here, and that's something you're going to have to remember all throughout algebra. Mathematicians typically don't write the multiplication sign. The inverse operation, or the opposite operation of multiply, is divide. So to get rid of something that's being divided, that's being multiplied, we're going to divide. Now, there's one rule. Whatever you do to the left side of an equation, you have to do something to the right, the exact same thing. So when I divide 2 by 2, the 2 goes away, leaves me with an x, which is exactly what I was wanting to happen. I want that variable or that question mark by itself. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. Now we all knew that 2 times something equaled 8 meant that something was 4, but this is how you algebraically show it. Now I know this looks very simple, but these are not always going to be simple. So for instance, if we had a negative 3 times y equals 12. Again, there's an understood multiplication happening right there. To get rid of that multiplication, we're going to divide. Those cancel. So y would equal, and do you remember what multiplication and division happened when you had different signs? Well, the 12 is positive. We're dividing by a negative. Therefore, our quotient must be negative because that's all that's left in our pizza guy. So y equals negative 4. This works the same with division. So if I have x divided by 2 equals 16, to get rid of division, we're going to use multiplication. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. Remember, if you do it on the left, you have to do it on the right. That causes this to cancel, and we learned that from fractions. So x must equal 32. So when you have adding and subtracting, that's the same. You use inverse operations to get rid of it. So let's say we have 2 plus x equals 6. Now what would you add to 2 to get 6? We all know in our head right now, x has to be 4. And it's hard sometimes for people to realize that that 2 is really a positive 2, so you're really adding it to the left. When they come out front and there's no symbol in front of them, we kind of get confused. You're still going to have to subtract that 2 from both sides because your mission is to get x by itself. And so x does equal 4 because 6 minus 2 is 4. So let me show you a different way that you will see the addition being used. Now this, it's very easy to see that that's being added, and so the opposite of that is subtract. And so y would equal 4. But when your constant is out front, for instance, 3 equals 2 plus x, sometimes it's hard for us to see we have to subtract that 2. That comes with practice. Okay, so if we undo or get rid of a positive or something being added by subtracting it, how do you think we get rid of something that's negative? So I'm going to look at number 4 on the 2.1 solving one variable equations now, because there is a subtraction there. To get rid of a subtraction, we do the opposite, or the inverse operation, which is addition. And negative 5 plus 5 becomes a 0. And negative 4 plus 5 is positive 1. So when you have the variable completely by itself, you know exactly what it equals, and you have solved the equation. Remember, something with an equal sign will have a solution. These are now equations and not expressions. So sometimes these get a little more difficult. For instance, 4 minus x equals 7. And so we need to subtract the 4. So negative x equals 3. Well, this negative x is kind of funny because negative x really equals negative 1 times x. There's a coefficient on this x of a negative 1. It's not by itself yet. We just don't ever write the 1s in front of the x's. You still have to divide this by that coefficient. Remember when we had 2x equals 8 and we had to divide by that coefficient to get x equals 4? It's the same process here. We have a coefficient, so x is not by itself, so we have to divide. And those will cancel out, and so x will be positive divided by negative is negative, negative 3. So on this activity, that should cover everything that you need to learn. Now sometimes we will have two fractions. So if we had r over 3 equals 4 over 7, to get r by itself, you will multiply both sides by 3. They will cancel. So r will equal 4 over 7 times 3. And we've done multiplication of fractions. That's 12 over 7. Or, if your answer choices appear as improper fractions, that's 1 5/7. Or, if they were a decimal, that would be approximately 0.71. So that should help you with those. Well, also when we talk about one variable equations, we get into percentages. Well, a percent is a portion of 100. So 2% equals 0.02, or 2 out of 100, or 2 cents. Percent is always in pennies, kind of. So 13% equals 13 cents, and how do you write that? 0.13. We know how to write the cents in money. We never really knew we were writing a percent. Percent is always based on 100. 99% is almost $1. It's 99 cents. 100% is $1. And that's $1. That's how you write that. So look at what you're doing with the decimal. If your decimal started where the percent sign was, it is always moving 2 places. And if you're going from percent to decimal, it went to the left. But look if you were going backwards. So if I told you you had 5 cents and I wanted you to write it in percentage, you would have to do that to get 5%. So it's easier to remember a rule left or right and to know when to go, which direction is difficult. But if you know that percent is pennies, it will be a lot easier for you to keep straight how to write that, because we know that 5 cents is not that much. We know that 5 cents is that much, and we know that cents is percents, hence the word percents, pennies. So another thing you need to know is the word of always means multiply. If you see of in a mathematical sentence, they want you to multiply. If you see forms of be, is, are, was, will be, that means equal. So if you have a number sentence or a question, for instance, what percent of 65 is 12? Those are sometimes very difficult to figure out. Well, if you remember what I just told you, that of and is are multiply and equals, you can substitute those right in. And because this is what we don't know, we're going to let that be x. And x was a percent. So x percent times 65 equals 12. Well, how do we solve for that? X. Divide by 65. And so x percent equals 12 divided by 65. And whatever that is will give you your value. And then sometimes we'll say things like this. This is number 56. 49% of 46.8 is what? Well, fill in what I just told you. 49% times 46.8 equals x. Now right here is the key. You cannot take 49% times that. This is a decimal, and this is not a decimal. This is still written with the percent notation. We need to change that to a decimal for a penny so that it agrees with this form. Well, 49% is 49 cents. So 49 cents times 46.8 will give you your value for x. And if you do that in your calculator or in your head, if you're that good, you'll know exactly what x is. And I could not tell you off the top of my head. I don't have a calculator open. But this will get you a basic understanding of solving one variable equations. Good luck.